Hi everyone. Today we're going to be looking at this Roman Props Gen 2 Graflex that I've recently acquired. As usual, I'll be going through the full thing from top to bottom and just breaking it down into individual parts and comparing it to my vintage Graflex, just to try to spot any different tells or anything like that. This is going to be used to build a Rise of Skywalker hilt using this KR Sabers kit. So I'll be using this middle section, the clamp, because no one else does these. I won't be using the lower section from KR, although it's perfectly fine. It even has the pommel vented already for sound, but I won't be installing it anyway, so that's not important to me. I will be harvesting these grips because they're accurate, and it's got the that unique belt clip track there in the back with the screws. So I will be using these. These will be removed from this and applied to this. And the reason I'm doing this is, obviously many of you are going to know this, but the Roman Props Graflex is the exact same model that was used in filming the Rise of the Skywalker. It was used for the main hero prop, essentially. For the first time ever, they used a replica from a third-party vendor. In the previous two films in the sequel trilogy, they used a vintage Graflex like this one. And obviously throughout the original trilogy, a vintage Graflex was used. But for the first time, they went with a replica, and the replica they chose to use was actually acquired from Roman Props. So I thought, in order to keep it as accurate as possible, I'm going to be using a Roman Props as well. Let's just go ahead and take a look at this. So starting with the finish first is absolutely beautiful. I've already inspected this. I haven't seen any blemishes or marks or scratches or anything like that, any imperfections. Usually when Romans, I mean, there's a few machining marks here and there, but they're very subtle. But usually when there's something obvious, Romans will reduce the price on it and sell it as like a B grade or a blemished prop. But this one is flawless. And this very nice brushed finish here is really very similar to what a vintage Graflex. I mean, this one, mind you, is very old and it's a Fulmer, but you can still see here these beautiful brushed lines there, which are typical of a Graflex. The S-curve I was quite happy with. Previously, I did used to have a Gen 1 Graflex from Romans, and the S-curve was good, but not quite as good as this. I feel like he's improved that. So it's a nice straight cut across the top there. That's sort of parallel with this square cut here. And it just curves down at the right sort of deflection. And it gives you this very beautiful and accurate S-curve that I've previously only seen with TGS Graflexes. I have looked at a few other replicas and none of them, they're almost always a little too sort of curved up here. So just comparing it side by side with the vintage, just to look at that S-curve. I mean, I can't tell any differences. Maybe some of you eagle-eyed experts can, but I can't. To me, they look the same. But I am no expert, obviously. But it looks very, very good. Anyway, bunny ears are fine. I've looked at those, they're accurate. I'm not sure I like this. They're sort of out a bit too much like that. I don't know if I just got a bad one, or if I just play with it a little over time, it would loosen. But that's okay, it's not a big deal. The bunny ear rivet, if you'll notice here, it's got it's a hex screw, and that's obviously not accurate to a vintage, which have the characteristic domed rivet. But this obviously makes it much easier to remove the assembly if you wanted to, like to install it or whatever. It's so much easier doing it this way. And this is fine with me. As I said, it'll be used for The Rise of Skywalker, which it did have that dimple for the Allen key. So that's not a problem for me. But if I was using it to build like any other, like in episode 4, episode 5, I would have replaced this with a screw from TGS. Moving on. Yeah, bulb assembly looks good. This is going to need some weathering. It's obviously spring loaded, which is accurate. So this can be used as a flash. It even has the little pilot bulb inside. And it would just need batteries, and pretty much that's it. So yeah, the socket looks good. This is too clean for my liking. I'll probably just end up weathering this a bit. Same here with the pins. Interesting that there are smooth pins, although there's a standard ink glass eye. So that's not really accurate for any vintage. Normally a vintage Fulmer would have smooth pins and a Fulmer glass eye, which looks really different to this, or an ink glass eye, which looks like that, and step pins. It's not a rule, but most of the time. But again, this is accurate for episode 9. I'm not going vintage accurate for this build. I'll take this off and we'll look at the glass eye a little more closely. Oh, before I do that, I'd just like to, I love this. A lot of replicas get this wrong. I'm not going to be naming names here, obviously that's inappropriate, but the glass eye should be dead center in this bulge here. You can see it is, so that's perfect. A lot of replicas don't get this right, where it's like a little too low, a little too high. Same here for the red button. It's right bang in the middle. And that is a beautiful job. So yeah, very impressed with that. Very happy with that. It's definitely an improvement over the Gen 1. There's a bulb. Let's have a closer look at the glass eye. So that's an ink style. Accurate for episodes, well, 7 to 9 really. 7 and 8 obviously had the knurling sanded to show the brass underneath, but with episode 9 they just kept the knurling as it is. So I won't be touching this. The sync pens, as I said, I'd like to give them a bit of weathering, probably just with some paint or brass black, just to make them look a little more aged. Red button looks good. It's a little too shiny to pass as an accurate vintage replica. Normally they're a little bit more sort of dulled. Again, that doesn't bother me as I'm doing in episode 9, but if I were to use this Graflex to build something like an episode 7, 4, whatever, I'd probably personally remove this and replace it with one from TGS, which has that sort of brushed satin finish. Let's try to get this off. Screwed on pretty tight. I'm just curious whether underneath he's got the pins or not. Oh, that's tight. I might have to do that later because I don't want to like force it off and damage the threading. Beer tab looks accurate. It's got that dull finish and the large machined rivet, which is accurate of an ink. Nothing to compare it to. That one's missing the beer tab altogether. But yeah, normally inks have a large machined beer tab rivet like that. Fulmers are a bit more flat. So yeah, this would be a very accurate ink flash. I really like that even the set screw over here has got like machining marks. I'm not sure if that's accurate or not. I just like the way it looks. And obviously we've got the full bulb assembly inside with those contacts. You can see them here and here. So that's a good little addition there. Yeah, perfect. No complaints whatsoever. My only thing, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention the bunny ears is a ink style, because you can see it has here and here, you can see those little sort of divots, 2 on this side and 2 on that side. I'll just show you, compared to a former bunny ears, it doesn't have those. All it has is that rivet on top, just on one side, but it doesn't have the double divots there on the bottom. So yeah, it's an ink. What was I saying before? Let's see. Yeah, my only thing slightly is just with the way these are like cut. If you look closely at the edge there, you can see the machining marks. It's not a problem, and I think that's really unavoidable, but that's how you tell like a replica from a vintage. That's one way to tell a replica from a vintage. Is you can see these machining marks here on the inside of the shroud area. I don't really see those on a vintage. It's much smoother. But yeah, otherwise it's absolutely beautiful. Okay, moving on to the clamp area and the lower section. What I'll do is I'll take this apart. It'll be easier to look at it more closely. So with the clamp, this is my biggest, I think, issue with this Graflex is the clamp lever. It's terribly shiny, and it feels like smooth, and the rivet is also super shiny. It just doesn't look accurate to me, to either models, ink or former. I could be wrong, but I mean, on every other clamp that I've owned, it's much more of a brushed finish. So yeah, I mean, this is a former, so it's slightly less matte than the ink models, but it's not as shiny as this. Especially that rivet there, it just doesn't look right. It's just super reflective. It's not a big problem, but if I were making this into, again, episode 7, episode 4, episode 5, I'd definitely be replacing that lever. The clamp itself looks fine, no issues with that. I'm not sure if this is stamped or engraved. It feels a little shallow. I can't tell. I don't think it's stamped, because I can't feel it from the inside. I mean, it might be, but it just doesn't feel as... Let me find, I have a vintage clamp, because this one's obviously covered. So this is a vintage clamp here, just for comparison, and they just feel, the stamping just feels a bit deeper, if that makes sense. And these lines over here, comparing that to the Romans, they're just not as deep. So if it's stamping, it's obviously slightly, I don't know, slightly shallower or something, but I have a feeling they're just engraved. Also, you can see between the lines here, it's very hard to tell, but there are some marks. There. So I feel like these are engraved rather than stamped. It also doesn't line up. That line there from the parallel lines should be in line with the end of the X, like so. Or not the end of the line. I'm sorry. The square cut here, that should line like that. Here it goes over a bit, just slightly. Same on the other side. It doesn't line up with the G perfectly. There's a little bit of a gap. That might be intentional by Roman to so it's not like sold as a you know, a counterfeit. Someone might like try to weather this or age it or whatever and pass it on as a vintage Graflex lamp. That obviously would be cheating, but you know, things like that do happen on eBay from time to time. So this would not pass as a vintage because of the width of the stamping. Okay, and finally, lower section. Nothing much to say about here. Again, that same beautiful brushed finish. Stamping, it's got the RE for Roman Empire. Again, that helps to tell it apart from a vintage. Again, there's something here about the stamping. I can't really put my finger on it, but try to compare it. Just, you see the lettering here on the right side on a vintage, and there, it's just almost like they're thicker, making it look a little bit more, almost like a little messier, not as clean as these like lines here. They're almost like too thick, these letters, compared to there. Again, you know, these are absolute nitpicks. It doesn't matter. This is going to be covered anyway for the episode 9. But I'm just saying it in case someone wanted to buy this and make it like into an accurate episode 4, episode 5, and you want to get as close as possible to a vintage, then there are 1 or 2 little tells. But otherwise, it's a beautiful Graflex. Top notch, one of the best actually I've looked at. I think TGS Gen 2 and Roman's Gen 2 are still the top replicas at the moment for me, anyway, in my opinion. And everything else kind of comes second place to those 2. Yeah, so I will be building this as an episode 9. I'll be using this clamp. So this clamp won't be part of this build. And these grips, and then obviously I've got the kit from KR Sabers, the stencils, leather straps and rivets, and a friend of mine is going to be helping me do that. I can't do the whole thing, it's beyond my skill set, so yeah, I will be posting updates when it's complete. Yeah, thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.